Moving on, the next question says, Azolla is a genus of small ferns that float in slow-flowing or stationary fresh water. Azolla has cavities in its leaves that contain nitrogen-fixing bacteria called Anabaena azothli. In some parts of the world, farmers grow Azolla in their rice fields. Rice fields are flooded with water so that rice plants grow half-submerged. Figure 3.1 shows rice and Azolla growing together in a flooded field. Figure 3.2 shows a section through an Azolla leaf. It also mentions features in the diagram such as rice plants, clumps of Azolla, leaf cavity containing air, nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Then in the first part, it says, Azolla is a fern and rice is a flowering plant. Ferns and flowering plants are two groups in the plant kingdom, and asks, using information from Figure 3.1 and Figure 3.2, state two structural features used to classify Azolla in the plant kingdom. In simple understanding, this question is asking us to identify basic plant features that show Azolla belongs to the plant kingdom. From the diagram and general knowledge, we look for structures that are common in plants, such as parts inside the cells or features that help in photosynthesis and support. So here, we just need to name two such structural characteristics. The answer is Azolla is classified in the plant kingdom because it has chloroplasts and cell walls. This means that Azolla has chloroplasts, which are structures used for photosynthesis, allowing the plant to make its own food, and it also has cell walls, which provide support and structure to plant cells. These are key features that identify it as a member of the plant kingdom. This part was based on recalling basic knowledge of plant structure, and now we move to the next part which focuses more on the topic from this chapter. Now part 2 states, complete the sentences below, where we are given incomplete sentences related to Figure 3.1 and Figure 3.2. Now, we need to carefully read each sentence and use our knowledge about flowering plants and ferns to complete them correctly. The first sentence is rice plants reproduce sexually and after pollination they produce that are then dispersed. Since rice is a flowering plant, after pollination and fertilization, it produces seeds which are then dispersed. So the correct answer here is seeds. The next sentence is Azolla reproduces sexually by producing so here we will write gametes because Azolla is a fern and ferns like Azolla reproduce sexually by producing gametes, which later fuse during fertilization. We can also write spores formed in sporangia, as ferns commonly reproduce using spores. This shows that flowering plants like rice reproduce by forming seeds after pollination, whereas ferns like Azolla reproduce by producing gametes or spores. These both will be considered correct according to your mark scheme. Now we move on to the MCQs. The first one says, which part of the flower develops into a fruit? Now, this question is checking our understanding of flower structure. After fertilization, the ovary of the flower develops into the fruit, while the ovules inside it become seeds. So, the correct answer is A. Ovary is the correct answer here. Next, it says, chromosomes, DNA molecules and genes are pieces of inherited material with different sizes. Which statement describes the relationship between these pieces of inherited material? So, genes are actually small sections of DNA, and many genes together make up a chromosome. So, chromosomes are larger structures that contain DNA and genes, so, the correct answer here is A. A chromosome is larger than a gene. The next one says, during the division of a nucleus by meiosis, changes can happen that produce a gamete with an abnormal number of genes or an abnormal number of chromosomes. Which change can result in a child having Down syndrome. Down syndrome occurs when a gamete contains an extra chromosome due to an error in meiosis. When this gamete fuses during fertilization, the resulting child has an extra chromosome, leading to the condition. So, the correct answer is A. A gamete with one extra chromosome. Moving on, we have more MCQs here. The first one says, an experiment is set up to investigate the conditions necessary for seeds to germinate. In which flask will the seeds germinate first? Now, this question is testing the conditions required for germination. Seeds need moisture, oxygen, and a suitable temperature to germinate. Damp cotton wool provides the moisture, and 25 degrees Celsius is an ideal temperature, so seeds will germinate fastest under these conditions. The correct answer is D. Damp cotton wool, 25 degrees Celsius. Next, it says, the diagrams show some plant and animal cells. They are not drawn to the same scale. Which cells contain haploid nuclei? The options are, A is white blood cell, B is sperm cell which is a gamete, C is plant cell, and D is red blood cell. This means that gametes are the only cells among these that contain haploid nuclei, which have half the number of chromosomes. Other cells like white blood cells and plant cells are diploid, meaning they have the full set of chromosomes, while red blood cells do not have a nucleus at all. So out of this, B is the correct answer. Now coming back to paper 2 questions, we move to the next question which says, sycamore trees, scientific name is Acer pseudoplatanus, grow throughout most of Europe. Now part A, begins with, sycamore trees produce flowers in the spring. The flowers have these following characteristics. They are small and green-colored, produce large quantities of small, light pollen grains and contain nectar. Then it asks, explain why scientists think that the flowers can be pollinated by wind and by insects. So, this question is asking us to link the features of the flowers to different methods of pollination. Some characteristics are typical of wind pollination, while others are typical of insect pollination, so we need to explain both. So the answer we write here is, the flowers are small and green, which is a characteristic of wind-pollinated plants as they do not need to attract insects. They also produce large amounts of light pollen, increasing the chance of it being carried by the wind. In addition, the flowers contain nectar, which attracts insects, suggesting that insect pollination can also occur. This means that the dull color and lightweight pollen support wind pollination, while the presence of nectar attracts insects, so both methods are possible. Next, Part 2 says, the flowers of the sycamore tree are cross-pollinated, and asks, state an advantage of cross-pollination rather than self-pollination. In simple terms, this is asking for one benefit of cross-pollination. The simple answer is cross-pollination increases variation, giving a greater capacity to respond to changes in the environment. This means that cross-pollination mixes genetic material from different plants, leading to variation, which helps species survive environmental changes. Next we have Part B, which says, the sentences describe the processes that occur in a sycamore flower after pollination. Complete the sentences by writing words in the gaps. Here we have to fill in the terms related to fertilization and seed formation, so, we will write it as, the completed answer is the pollen grain grows a pollen tube which allows the male gamete to reach the female gamete. After fertilization, the ovule becomes a seed and the ovary will develop into a fruit. The pollen tube acts as a pathway for the male gamete, and after fertilization, the ovule develops into a seed while the ovary forms the fruit. Finally, Part C says, Figure 6.1 shows 2 sycamore fruits. The wings on the fruits cause them to spin as they fall to the ground. This slows their fall so that they can be blown away by the wind, and asks, explain why this is an advantage to the parent tree and any young trees that are produced from these fruits. In simple words, this is asking why seed dispersal is beneficial, so, the answer is the young trees will grow away from the parent tree, which prevents competition for resources such as light, water, and minerals. This means that by being carried away by the wind, the seeds land far from the parent plant, reducing competition and giving the new plants a better chance to grow and survive.